I've been a victim of bad financial advice. It's not something I'm proud of, but I'm not ashamed of it either. That's the thing. It was an opportunity for somebody to give me something I didn't want, but they were going to get a huge upfront commission. And that's where you get caught. Hi, my name's Deane. I'm a former professional footballer. I played for clubs such as Sheffield United, Leeds United, Benfica, Middlesbrough, West Ham, Sunderland, 3 caps for England. I then went from there into football management in Norway, which was a real defining moment for me in terms of understanding the other side of football. Thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm a paddle fan now.
Brian's one of those people who did get spat out of football but came back in, and he managed to get picked up and go on that elite journey. But when you're on an elite journey, your focus is very much on the sport you're playing. Whether you're a footballer, whether you're an Olympic rower, they're the same thing. Your focus is primarily on your sport. And how do you get the best performance out of yourself? You don't want to be worrying about finances. So you look for elsewhere for guidance and support, and that makes you a vulnerable customer. With SPORTA, we treat all professional athletes as vulnerable customers because their primary focus is not on their financial well-being, it's on their sporting career and what they can achieve, and rightfully so.
For me, sport, professional sport, whether it's football, whether it's fencing, whether it's boxing, people who play sport are not ordinary people who have a job, who working in a factory or whatever. They are people who have specific needs. And as a result of that, they should be getting specific advice. For me, it grates on me. I know it goes on all the time out there. And, as somebody who knows the industry and knows people who are involved with being, with training every day and so on, you never want to look at somebody and then think, well, he doesn't know what he's on about, so you'll just say yes to everything. And it's quite sad, but there is opportunity out there for people to exploit you in those terms.
How long was your professional career?
21 years. I was a professional footballer, so I signed my first professional contract at 17. Funnily enough, the story for me was that when I didn't get an apprenticeship, as they were called then. I was playing grassroots football, actually broke my leg. I dislocated my ankle, broke my tibia, fibula, and I was out for 8 months. And, my determination just, increased, because football was the one thing that I wanted to do more than anything.
I think Brian Deane's a great case study, if you like, of people in sport who have started off as kids kicking a football around in the street into being picked up by professional clubs, and then going on that journey into the academy, into what does that look like, jumping into the football bubble. And it is a bubble because you're looked after very well. Don't have to worry about certain financial things. But if you get popped out of that bubble, or you don't make it at 16 and you're dropped, there's a bunch of life lessons that you haven't had because of how good you were at football, essentially, which seems a weird thing to say, that it's now set you up poorly for the rest of your life.
So when I came out of plaster, which was in those days 8 to 12 weeks, I then started my own rehab without really knowing what I was doing. But by the time the start of the season came, I wrote down to Doncaster Rovers, my first professional club, for a trial. And I was fortunate that the chief scout had been at Leeds when I was on trial there. He invited me down, and it just went from there. So, You know, that kind of determination, that fight, really, you know, I'm very lucky that I had those experiences of being knocked back, but getting back up and continuing on. And what sport does is it gives you those opportunities to learn about life itself. You know, you might not become a professional footballer, but what it will do is it will show you a way of doing something that is right for you. There are very few kids who actually go on to become a professional footballer. I had to be realistic. You know, anything could have happened. And so, you know, I always tried my best at school, shall we say. There's all kinds of lessons that you learn. It's not just the actual art of playing football, it's the discipline. You know, it's the resilience, it's recovering from knockbacks.
I think setbacks in life are something that if you can learn how to win and even lose in a game of basketball, there's aspects of that which are going to translate to how you deal with that, and then how you deal with setbacks going forward in life that could be related to your sport. So I think a big one for us is seeing injuries happen. One of our boys went to high school in America. First year, then second year, broke his Achilles. And so for all those reasons to go as a 16-year-old, then you're 17 in America and you're out for a whole year. You know, how do you deal with that? If we can help these kids to be more resilient and more able to cope with adversity and those setbacks.
The more disciplined you are, the more you do things in a proper way, you see results. And that was always a big thing for me. You know, you can see people making shortcuts when it comes to sport, but if you do it properly, I always felt that the results were more fulfilling.
No real challenge to stop the Sheffield United striker scoring. No one could eclipse the performance of Deane. He headed a first half hat-trick. Just before the hour, he swept down the right and pulled the ball across for Adrian Littlejohn to score a fourth decisive goal. Deane with the header. Deane's aerial supremacy was going to be a major problem for Burnley.
Good footwork, Myton. Deane. 4-0!
Hat-trick number 2 of the week for Deane came minutes later. And this time the Burnley defence gave Deane so much room he didn't have to jump.
This must be from Deane, and it is.
Here, stays on his feet, round the goalkeeper, this must be 2-0. Simon Deane, 2 goals against Liverpool here.
By the end of the night, Deane needed stitches in a lip injury, but he didn't mind, he was having a great time of things.
There's definitely stories that we know hasn't quite fulfilled that potential, but they've worked hard in school. And I think that's another kind of tie-in where we don't just want them to be great basketball players, we want them to think about how they get their GCSEs, their A-levels, their high school diplomas. You know, make sure they've got educational, you know, fallback all the time.
That's an advice that I would give to any young person when it comes to doing something. Don't take shortcuts. You know, try and do it properly. Try to get in the right frame of mind, not only for a sporting career, but for your life in general. I'll never forget, I went, you know, with my tiny contract at the time. I remember going to the bank and saying, listen, I'd really like to do this and I'd really like to get into buying property and so on. And you know, we spoke about, right, what do you earn, blah, blah, blah. And he, basically I got dismissed pretty quickly. Even though I could probably afford to buy the house, I just didn't have the skill or the understanding to actually execute that plan. And if you've got plenty of money, people will always come out of the woodwork and help you because they're getting something out of it. But if you're somebody who is a sports person and you're trying to get yourself on that ladder, you know, getting good advice is not always easy.
You got, unfortunately, situations of youth players and those people who are retiring within their elite sporting journey that are coming out ill-prepared for the world and financial infrastructure. And they're not taken into consideration normally within financial institutions. So what I mean by that is that you need your mortgages, you need your loans, you need to take a car.
I think everybody sets out with the right, with the right idea of what they want to do for the right reasons. But sometimes that lack of understanding can send you down another path. I ended up with an endowment at 21 years age, and that was because I was exploited, not knowing that was no good for me. I was just saying, yeah. I don't want to go into the details of where it came from and so on, but the point was, I ended up with something that was totally inappropriate for myself.
We have a massive section of our community, and that being sport, who unfortunately have been let down by traditional lenders. And again, standard policies and products are your mortgages, your loans, and how can we not allow them to have a life which we call it normal? Industries actually gain through that credit history. And we should be supporting our heroes and legends and providing them the same scope of a normal life and a normal financial products.
As a sports person, you want to focus on what you're doing, the elite side of the sport. You have to focus on that. You can't 1 minute come off working with 20 other elite individuals and then say, right, I'm going to put my suit and tie on now and I'm going to go and work. It doesn't work like that. In order to become the best, you have to be able to focus on that all the time, and you can apply that to anything you do in life. You have to be able to give it everything. So having people and the right kinds of people behind you with your interests at heart is so important.
So I've seen it from different levels. So I've seen it from elite sportsmen and women's perspective. The fact that they are really focused on delivering what they're delivering. And so they don't get much time or capacity to focus on their finances, nor do they have particularly well-tailored solutions. When you're going through the peaks and troughs of an elite sportsman or women, then what you actually need is almost like a money smoother, or you need somebody who understands actually what your needs are. And when it gets to the end of that journey, I've had a number of athletes who are coming to the end of their elite performance journey, and then what do they want to do? They want to buy a house, they want to get a job, all of those things. Actually, it's quite complicated. It is quite complicated if you haven't had a regular income and you've been focused on sport. So how do we ensure, I think, offering products and services that can really ensure that their needs are catered for, both whilst they're in the sport so they can focus, but also when they come out. I've seen that firsthand.
That's one of the challenges. I think there's a number of stories where you can see people are focused on that, they get to elite level, they deliver gold medals, or they score the first Premiership goal, things like that. And when they come to the end of their career, they say sports people die twice. They die at the end of their career, and then obviously the rest of us, when we biologically pass on. So I think that point when sport's over, it's a massive readjustment. Your whole life has been around performance, around your sport, around excellence, your discipline to actually drive yourself forward. And then what do? You haven't been working in an office for 20 years. You haven't been working in a particular way that the rest of us have. So post-sport, it's almost like it's not just a new chapter, it's like being reborn. And I think it's really, really hard for sports people to come to terms with.
I try to blank it out. Basically an endowment will be, it's like an extra insurance policy, but it was just totally inappropriate for me at the time. And it was only when I came to cash it and realised that, you shouldn't have had this at that age, and especially with what I was doing. My mortgage was only about, it wasn't a lot of money, and but it was an opportunity for somebody else to sell me it. That's the thing. It was an opportunity for somebody to basically give me something I didn't want, but they were going to get a huge upfront commission, and that's where you get caught. People can offer you goods and services, products that you don't need, but it carries a commission at the front end for themselves.
the more activity you do, the greater your capacity from a brain perspective and brain health, the easier it is to manage your finance. The greater position your finances are in, the more appetite you have to train. So it's this cyclical scenario. And what I found was actually, from my previous experience, that people in the military, people who were not financially literate or had too much time focused on, a mission orientation, let's say, so they were, what's the outcome they needed to achieve, they weren't particularly financially savvy, and actually educating them, giving them sort of life after the military was really, really important. It's really similar with sports personality. So having worked in sport now for a good 8-9 years, the reality is in sort of a senior leadership position, the reality is you see real parallels across that. So you see the need to be more financially literate. You understand that actually products and services from your regular high street bank don't particularly serve the need of that consumer, be that your athlete, be that your community, or indeed the fan base or the providers, the suppliers.
And that's what SPORTA is going to be doing, supporting, nurturing, and providing the correct financial products to what they need. Now that's incredible. And that hasn't been considered as an ecosystem before. So you've got fan-based, you've got your associations, you've got your clubs, all the way through to your players.
You can go to an ordinary bank and say, listen, I need this, can you help me? And they'll have people who necessarily only follow the rules of the book without really being able to look at somebody as an individual and say, well, actually, we need to take specialist advice on this. This is the advice we can give you in this situation. This is what it's going to mean. You might have to pay a little bit more interest, for example, but it'll be tailored to make sure that you don't find yourself in a situation where it's totally unacceptable for you to actually have. And everybody ends up happier that way. Sport is an opportunity to change your life, become the person who you always wanted to be, and if you can get it right on the pitch or the court, and you can get it right off the court, then you're setting yourself up to have a pretty steady and secure future.
The reward is amazing, like when you just think about all the kids that have been affected, the teenagers that have grown up and perhaps not got involved with stuff that they could do in their culture. Our culture might be affluent, but affluence brings with it an opportunity to buy whatever they want to buy, and that can be bad things as well as good things. So maybe in the less affluent there could be a whole load of maybe stealing or violence going on. These kids don't have to be violent to get some bad stuff in their body.